Welcome to Between Over and Next with your hosts, Holli and Robert, a happily married couple who explore the space between what was, what is, and what's to come. From career changes to navigating life's uncertainties, this dynamic duo will empower you to live your happiest life at every age and stage. So, get ready because your journey with Holli and Robert starts now.
Hello and welcome to Between Over and Next. Hi, Holli.
Hi, Robert. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic today.
You know what I think today would be a really good thing to share?
I have a feeling you're going to tell me.
What were your most favorite jobs that you ever had?
I think the ones that pop out to me are Toys R Us. I was in the setup department, which was in the back in the warehouse. I would put the bicycles together. I was working in a toy store, which was excellent, but I didn't have to be necessarily on the sales floor dealing with the general public.
How old were you?
I was a senior in high school. I remember having to work during Christmas. The store was open until midnight. So we'd get out of there like 1:45 in the morning, and I had to be in school at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Besides putting together bicycles, did you learn anything else?
At Toys R Us?
Yeah.
Yes, I learned I didn't look good in orange.
Okay.
The orange vest that we used to have.
Who does?
It was terrible, unless you're a prisoner. And I was a gnome once. We had the characters come in. I remember like one weekend. So they shipped us the Jeffrey the Giraffe costumes and all of the other things. And there was like the Incredible Hulk.
You know, when I thought I knew everything about you, and there you go.
Captain America and all. And I got to wear the costume of a gnome.
I wish I could see a photo of that. I never wanted to work in a fast food place. And you're telling me you really liked it.
Burger King was fun.
Really?
Yeah. Even though I had the absolute worst manager. Howie.
Why?
He was abusive. He was always putting you down.
So, but you said you loved working there.
And because of the people, like Bill.
Oh, okay.
So,
now tell them the other favorite job that you loved. These are all in high school then.
Oh, Ice Cream Man? Is that the one?
Yes.
Yeah, I was a good humor man.
And what'd you love about that?
What is there not to love about being the Ice Cream Man?
I agree with you because I
Holy
love
cow.
ice cream. But why don't you tell everyone what you did?
So I took advantage of the children. Not in a bad way. I mean, not in a good way, but not in a bad way. In addition to ice cream on the truck, we also sold candy. Anything from like a nickel up to $1. I wouldn't necessarily give change. So if the ice cream was $1.50 and they gave me $2, I would tell the kid, well, now you've got 50 cents to spend left. You know, what kind of candy do you want? And
no one really questioned you, did they?
No, the kids looked at it as like, oh, bonus. You know, I get to order some candy.
When you decided to go to college, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Obviously not.
Okay, what was your major?
Psychology.
Okay.
Like, what was I going to be?
What were you going to be?
I have no idea.
You have no idea?
No. But it was kind of like you could use psychology with anything, really.
The main reason I was asking these questions, you should know me by now, that I do everything with intention. Our guest today, David Noonan, is a seasoned writer with 50 years of experience in the industry.
Incredible.
Okay? We met him through a friend.
Through a friend, yeah.
And we were fascinated by his story because he has been published in prestigious magazines. He has penned captivating books, and he's even worked as a screenwriter. He's done almost every kind of writing there is, and he's always looking for new paths. He said to me, one of the good things about getting older, just one of the good things, is that
one of many,
that there's more to write about.
Right.
So his personal pivots, his stories worthy of talking about, because he's going to tell you he knew what he wanted to be when he grew up. You're going to learn how many jobs he's had in his life.
Right. And while you're listening, think about how many jobs you've all had. So let's meet David.
Hi, David.
Hello.
Welcome to Between Over and Next.
So glad that you're
I'm happy to be here.
So what fascinated me is that list of 38 jobs
Yes.
that you shared with us. You
Yes.
call it a life's work. So tell us a little bit more about that journey.
I realized suddenly one day, I had an epiphany, that if I looked at all the different jobs that I had done over the course of my life, that might give me a frame so I would have something to talk about.
Right.
So I started making a list. I grew up 6 kids, 8 people in the house, chores, as we used to call them, cleaning the kitchen, and then trying to make some money, shoveling snow, delivering newspapers. And I just tracked it all the way through. And when I added it all up, 38 jobs. In the 60s, the kind of jobs you did when you were a kid and a teenager, that's one sort of batch of jobs. Caddying, delivering newspapers. I parked cars when I was old enough to drive. And then there's the jobs that I did sort of around college time, which included working in a cemetery, pumping gas, putting up tents. And then there's a batch of jobs, and these to me were the interesting ones. Well, they were all interesting. But as I was looking at my list and thinking about this interview, a lot of the jobs that I did in the 70s, after I finished college, that I was going to have a career, I wanted a career as a writer. They don't pay you right away because you want to be a writer. You have to survive. So a lot of the jobs from the 70s were basically survival jobs. For example, when I was working on 47th Street, running a diamond scale.
That's kind of cool. Did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I knew in 7th grade. I'm one of the fortunate people who knew what he wanted to do early. I went to a small Catholic school in Morristown, St. Margaret's, which no longer exists. And I had a teacher in 7th grade. And we were just doing our usual, writing 7th grade essays and book reviews. Occasionally, I would write a book review about a book that didn't exist. That was one of my things that I liked to do. Sister Robert said to me, I think you have a talent for writing, and I hope you'll pursue it. And I said I appreciated that, even though I was in 7th grade. And it was clear to me that this was something that I'd like to do and something that I had a knack for. So I decided, I like that. So I stayed at it all through high school. It's one of these ineffable things. You have a talent. And once you realize you have it, it's your responsibility to see what you can do with it.
Sure.
And work on it and get better at it. I think I was a senior in Catholic high school, Bailey Ellard, which also doesn't exist anymore. And I had an instrumental English teacher. I suppose a lot of us have had those teachers that really played a big role in their life. Ruth Cochran was her name. She was teaching English senior year. And the first time I met her, she took me aside after class and she said, listen, after she'd read something I wrote, she goes, you need to get serious about this. And I said, okay. So there was a school paper, but I wasn't part of it. She created the newspaper club so that I would have some place that I could do my writing. She and I started researching colleges with journalism programs, and I ended up going to Syracuse University because I knew they had a good journalism school.
Right.
And I also knew that they had a daily newspaper, the Daily Orange, which still exists. So that was kind of my track. I got into college, and I worked on that paper, and I took journalism classes, and that's when I really knew this was my lane. I had found my route.
Your career journey has lots of different writing experiences,
Yep.
spanning not only across the years, but across the genres and the variety of media outlets.
Yes.
So how have these diverse roles influenced your approach to storytelling and writing techniques?
Well, journalism is storytelling. News writing is storytelling. I spent most of my career as a journalist has been as a feature writer. I have done some daily news reporting, but the thing I enjoyed the most and I liked doing the most was feature writing, longer pieces that took anywhere from a few days to months in some cases. But at the end of the day, you're telling stories. You're finding interesting people who are doing interesting things, and you're learning about what they do and then trying to communicate all of that to your readers, right? That's the core function. I've also written fiction. I've written a novel called Memoirs of a Caddy, which takes place in the summer of 1968. It reflects some of my experiences, but it's fictionalized. When you're making up stories, when I'm writing fiction or when I was writing screenplays, it was the same kind of a thing. You want to be able to tell a story that has the nature of being true. People say, how do you write fiction? Well, my approach to it, I just remember things that never happened. So I bring the same energy to remembering what things that did happen to trying to remember events that I'm fictionalizing so that they have the texture. For me, they have the feel of a memory and something that did really actually happen. But storytelling always comes down to me and the subject, the people, and what they're doing and what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and communicating all of that to my readers in as interesting and fun and entertaining way as possible.
Your backgrounds has been in science, medicine, and healthcare. In that field of writing, you need to have accuracy and clarity. It's very specialized. So how do you mix the two?
The secret of being a journalist, of being a writer of any kind, is that basically you spend your life learning. And I have learned more outside of the structured systems than I could ever learn in school. That's what I'm still doing it today. I mean, every day I'm researching, I'm looking for information. When I had finally broken through and I was writing for Esquire magazine and had access to other national publications with big feature stories, I had to find things that I wanted to write about because I had to go in and pitch stories that I thought were great. You learn what there's an appetite for. And if you have a good editor, and I've been fortunate in my freelance career to have good editors, I could just throw the germ of an idea on the table and they would help me refine it and get it right to send it up to the top editors who then might say, I don't know. So I would research these things and I would learn just enough to ask brain surgeons or astrophysicists questions that weren't really dumb questions, but they were enough for me to elicit answers that I could understand. I mean, the real secret of my career was being able to take really complicated concepts and ideas and translate them into accessible, readable, entertaining language.
So how much of the story is formulated in your head before you pitch it? Because you have to have some level of confidence that you can actually deliver on what you're pitching.
I have a pretty good track record. The issue is not so much getting the assignment, because that's a back and forth. That's a conversation. If they don't like an idea, you come back with another idea.
Right.
The issue is once you've written the piece, does it get
live up?
published?
Right.
Or does it get killed?
Yeah.
I think I have had two pieces that I really worked hard on that didn't go. One of them is dear to my heart. It's a piece I did for Sports Illustrated. This is a good example of how you think of an idea and how I used to think of ideas. So I had written some pieces for Sports Illustrated. I had a very good friend, colleague from Esquire who'd gone to Sports Illustrated who was an editor there. They were mostly health-related. One was about Lou Gehrig's disease, and one was about athletes' hearts. So I had written that because that was my subspecialty, and they liked those ideas. But I wanted to write something really about sports, right? So I was sitting around thinking about Sports Illustrated, and I realized that Sports Illustrated in those days, and that's pretty much gone now, but Sports Illustrated is all about winning, right? The winners get the cover, the stories about the drama. It was really the focus of it. Most of it was on winning. So I said to my friend, I want to do a story about losing. I want to do the definitive big story about losing. And he was cool enough to say, I think that's a great idea. So I did, this was I think in 1996 or 97. And he got it approved, and I reported the hell out of that thing. And I still have the piece, and every once in a while I take it out and look at it. What happened was there was a change in the editor at the top. That kind of thing happened, and my losing piece, which I was paid for, never made it.
Do you have a signature David Noonan byline?
Yes, I think I do. I think I have a certain voice. I think that you need to develop your voice. You need to develop your style. You have to have a distinctive approach. It's a little bit of a mystery. It's a little bit of secret sauce. Part of that is years of training, of learning, of hit and miss, but more just really working at it. I am not a fast writer. I have a sense of how I want to fashion things. The other factor is, what's your audience? So with Scientific American, you have an audience that's more tuned into more complicated science. It's a different readership. Newsweek, where I worked for many years, that's as broad a readership as you can get. It's a very general readership. Sports Illustrated, Those are athletes. The thing I did with Sports Illustrated was I brought something that you wouldn't expect to see in Sports Illustrated, which was a hardcore medical approach to sports topics. So when I wrote about Lou Gehrig, I had a chapter in my book about neuro, which I'd written about neurological medicine. When I was writing about ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, I decided I wanted to know everything about Lou Gehrig. So it turned out that that section of that book fit really well into Sports Illustrated, and they were happy to get something that was different and yet connected. You have to be able to adapt to different audiences and different readerships.
The other part of your story, personally and professionally, is that you had a little bout with screenwriting.
That's a good way to put it, yes.
Well,
yes.
Tell us, that was in the 90s, right?
Yes, that was in the 90s.
Tell us a little bit about the screenwriting, because what did you learn from that experience?
That was a pretty great experience. It was challenging at times, but on balance, it was really interesting and exciting. We had moved to Los Angeles, where our sons were born in the late 80s, and I published a novel called Memoirs of a Caddy, which I mentioned, and that book was optioned. I had a literary agent, and they had an office in New York, and they sent the book out. It was the Samuel Goldwyn Company, which was at that time run by Sam Goldwyn Jr., who was the father of the father. And so they optioned the screenplay, and I talked them into letting me write it. So I wrote that screenplay, and I ended up in the screenwriting business for about 7 or 8 years. The big thing I took away from screenwriting was the visuals. Because when you're writing a screenplay, obviously a lot of things are important. And Sam Goldwyn said to me when we were having a meeting early on, he knew I'd written one other screenplay. He said, just imagine, he said, that your movie is playing in this instance, Japan, and there's no subtitles, but you want your audience to know what's happening in this film, and they can only know what's happening by what they see on the screen. He was trying to communicate to me a higher level of thinking like a filmmaker. What you see is what really matters. And I had been doing this already in my journalism in describing details. And when I speak to journalism students, I always take a moment to say to them, how would you describe this room that we're in? You know, count the number of lights in the ceiling. How big is the room? To get a real sense of the space that you're in, the details, the physical space that you're in, and that the people are in. It was a different way to think about storytelling.
You told us you would like to be a songwriter.
Yeah, I am a songwriter.
Oh, so tell us a little bit about that pursuit of your creative expression.
I want to reference Between, Over, and Next.
Please do.
With this, because I think it's I love the way you frame it, Between, Over, and Next. I think that's terrific. And with regard to my songwriting, I think it's a good example of the options that we have that we may not realize that we have as we get to a certain point in our lives and our careers. I bought a guitar when I was 28 years old, the first time I had a guitar. I had a lot of friends who played guitar, and I never got around to doing it. So that was 45 years ago, I think, something like that. And so I taught myself to play. And it was hard enough learning the chords. So it kind of was, my instinct was to just start playing my own songs. I mean, I was a writer anyhow. But here's the thing about songwriting. It's so different than any other kind of writing I did because it's this alchemy. It's so purely creative. By that, I mean you don't really have a lot to do with it. It happens to you. More than writing novels and writing nonfiction stories and writing journalism, that's me, working, getting it, thinking about it, doing the research and trying to, really turn this lump of clay into something great. But when I'm playing my guitar and I'm trying to write a song, I'm strumming away. I've picked out some chords. I may hear a little figure that I'll stick with. Once it starts to happen, this phenomena of actually having a song come to you, but the first couple of lines and the first chords, it's happening to me. I don't know how or why. And then once I start to move through the song and the song starts to take shape, then I can get to work on it. But the initial experience is, to me, purely creative and mysterious. And when it's happening, it must be the kind of thing that happens to really great poets who are also highly trained, but nevertheless, They're able to assemble language and words. And that's the other thing. You don't have to worry about the sentences and the paragraphs and the rules of grammar and everything else. You can break all the rules when you're writing a song or when you're writing a poem.
That's interesting you say that, because I think adding the element of your other senses, right? Sound, right? Feeling the vibration of the notes, don't exist in a traditional writing experience.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Whether you write with music on in the background or anything, this is actually a blend of the words, the sound, the vibration. There's a lot going on at that moment that doesn't necessarily exist.
Yeah, it's an immersion. You're immersed in this event. You're just kind of there, and you're just kind of like, okay, you're tripping a little bit on the experience of having this song arrive from wherever it's arriving from, and then your job is to make sure that you can finish the thing,
to be the messenger,
to deliver it.
The different thread of words. I'm listening to this part of your experience and creative expression. It really is head and heart.
It's completely personal. So if you're writing about a particular medical procedure or you're writing about something really heavy duty and serious, there's a certain amount of rigor and discipline that goes into it. And there's certainly discipline and rigor in songwriting, but the real foundation of it is this cosmic phenomena, for want of a better term, that, as Robert was saying, you're just enveloped in this thing that's happening to you. But it's also storytelling. So like the songs that I write tend to be in this sort of Americana country vein. So they are tales, broken relationships, and cowboys and things like that. But the music part of it and the original sort of feel of it, that's what arrives and has to be delivered.
We would be remiss to not discuss the evolving landscape of writing.
For sure.
The intersection of technology and writing. How do you perceive the impact of artificial intelligence on the writing industry today? Do you see it as a tool for enhancing creativity or as a potential challenge to the traditional craft of writing?
I would say both. I would say, number one, as a tool, I think it's fantastic. My understanding of AI search is that it is so much more sophisticated, and you are able to refine it, and you are able to filter out. I look forward to finding other ways to use it as a tool. Is it a challenge? They can load every Charles Dickens novel and every T.S. Eliot poem and the Bible, and I suppose it can simulate human thought. But it will never be human. You can't hug it. It's never going to feel pain. It's never going to cry. It's not going to be born, and it's not going to die. And it's not going to have people that it loves die. It's not going to be in love. It can only replicate whatever we put into it. So human experience, which is what we all want to write about, and which is what we're living, we can put that into all kinds of forms. I'm sure when the first novels and the first poems were being written thousands and thousands of years ago, people were like, well, what is this? What am I getting here? The fact that we now have these programs that can imitate or emulate human experiences and human behavior, it still isn't human behavior.
I think a lot of the conversation that's happening now is a little bit ridiculous in that AI is going to replace humans and you're going to start losing your job and all of this. It's a tool like anything else.
Right.
How is the shift in technology? And technology is very broad because you've got not only the equipment that you use to do your writing, but then you're also talking the space where the writing is happening in social media and online platforms.
Yes.
Going from the magazines and newspapers that we all used to love.
God bless them.
Still love.
Well, yes, we still love them. We just consume them differently. So talk a little bit about the typewriter to the laptop and the traditional to today digital platforms.
I want to start by saying that you coined the term typewriter era in your notes, and I will never forget that. I'm sticking with that. The
I like
typewriter era. I didn't realize that I had started my career in the typewriter era, but that's apparently exactly what I did.
And by the way, those young people listening, do you know what a typewriter is?
I did start my career, as my first professional job is at the Daily Record, which is our local paper here. And I had an old manual typewriter. So you take a piece of this primitive newsprint, put a piece of carbon paper, another piece of paper, and you type your story. And then you distribute it.
And let me tell you, when you made mistakes, it was not fun.
That's right. And then the typewriter era, you were just going as fast as you possibly can, which wasn't necessarily that fast. It was pretty basic, but you were part of something that had been going on for a long time. Basically, producing copy, writing, producing material, books, news stories, whatever, had been exactly the same, I guess, 100 years before that. Yeah. Right. So if I started writing stuff in 1970, in 1870, it was pretty much the same approach. There was some kind of mechanical process. The thing that's striking to me is my personal experience in the last 50 years, how we went from that manual typewriter with carbon paper to what we have today. I'm really happy that my career followed that arc. And what's happening today is, I think that's great, is that the barriers are down. If you want to write a book and you want to sell it and you want to publish it yourself and send it out into the world, you can do that. And I think this is one of the great liberating things because now we have more voices. The barriers are down. You have a story you want to write, you want to tell that you think is important, and you want to get it out to as many people as possible. Thanks to the digital era, you can do it. And I think that's terrific. I really do. I loved being a newspaper man, the image of it, Cary Grant in, the front page. And I liked that tradition. I got my own subscription to Time magazine when I was in 6th grade. And I used to come to the house and I would read that. So I was very much into being a journalist and being a newsman, and sitting in an office typing on a manual typewriter was part of that. And so that was sort of the beginning of my career. And as we all know, the early years of our careers, they're special to us, right?
Sure.
They really are. I mean, they carry a lot of meaning. It's when we were becoming who we are today. All these ancient technologies that are gone now. I'm glad I was there to experience all that.
Right. When clip art, you were actually clipping art and pasting it up.
Yes. When I was making it as a freelance writer in the late 70s, early 80s, I was making more money as a paste-up artist than I was as a journalist, as a writer, because I was so good at it. I was getting paid, which is going to sound crazy. There's a lot of money. I was making $12 an hour in 1980, pasting up catalogs and textbooks and everything else. So all of that ancient cuneiform kind of journalism world, media world, I'm so glad I got to see it. I can only imagine 50 years from now, the young people who are working on digital formats are going to be doing. But it's exciting. I got my first laptop in, I think, 1988. It weighed about 15 pounds. The speed was 8 megahertz. It was a Zenith laptop, which I loved.
Monochrome screen.
Yes. But I think that all this digital technology really has made things better for generating creative content. In terms of social media and the pressure on journalists today, I'm concerned. The old formats are gone pretty much.
Right.
Some of the magazines have managed to survive. It must be really difficult right now to be trying to succeed as a freelance journalist who wants to write features.
How do you see the essence of good writing evolving in the context of today's digital age?
I think there's a lot of pressure, especially if you're trying to have a career. I think write more, write faster, write shorter, because that's sort of the social media formula.
It's actually the immediacy,
Yeah.
and it's also the attention span.
Yeah. For younger people who are consuming that kind of content consistently day in and day out, I'm talking about high school kids and college kids, that's their default setting for how information comes to them. The publishing industry is struggling to hang on, but to me, the book is the ultimate product. The nonfiction book or the novel, that's sort of the holy grail.
So tell everyone a little bit about what you're working on now.
Well, right now, I'm working as an editorial consultant to Dr. Philip Oswa, who is the CEO of the Montefiore Health System. And we are currently working on a book project for the MIT Press based on his experiences during the pandemic. and related topics.
What's your best advice for aspiring writers or those that have an itch or a desire, whether it be just as a hobby
Right.
or as a profession?
You know, again, getting back to between over and next, one of the things that I really liked about all those jobs that I did, especially once I was no longer a kid, is the people that I met who were doing all these different things. And I think that that's where I kind of get the hang of meeting people who came from different worlds and different backgrounds than I did. If you're at a point in your life and your career where you're looking around for something else to do, go do it and write about it. Writing at a professional level is really, really hard. But I do think that writing what's happening to you, regardless of whether it's something that could be published or could be read by others, I think writing, sitting down and taking the time to describe what's happening to you, what you're interested in, what you're thinking about, is healthy. We've accumulated wisdom that we don't even realize that we have accumulated in our daily lives with our families and our friends and navigating all of the obstacles that come at us and the crises that we have to deal with. We're learning all the time and we're alive. And I think that if you write it down, it just gives you a little perspective. It gives you a moment with yourself. And it's a way to communicate with yourself and with other people. And sometimes communicating with yourself is probably the most important thing you can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fantastic message. Is there anything else that you want to share that you want to cast to the world?
My wife, Susan, has an approach which is basically comes down to have a project. What's your project? My father always used to say to us, be productive. That was his sort of motto. At any point in time, whenever we got to see him, he would just say, be productive. And Susan's variation on that is have a project. So I think that if you're feeling a little this or a little that, and you're not sure what you're going to do, be productive that day. Get something done that day so that when somebody say, what did you do yesterday? You say, this is what I did, just to accomplish something. And as long as it's something you enjoy, and maybe it's something you hadn't thought about doing before, do something new.
Yeah.
And you might surprise yourself at how good you are at it and how much you enjoy it. And you may find a whole new avenue for expression.
We talk about the typewriter generation. I think it's difficult for digital natives to understand that there was even a challenge in getting the words onto the paper.
I'm happy that we talked about artificial intelligence. I think it was kind of cool to talk about that with someone who's been writing for so many years.
I think there's a very small percentage of the population that has even delved into artificial intelligence. I think more and more people are hearing about artificial intelligence and maybe even discussing about, will artificial intelligence take over?
I'm very impressed that he has been published in so many magazines that we all know and love, even though the magazines are not on the rack as we once knew it. At the top of this episode, I asked Robert about some of his favorite jobs, and I also asked him when he was in high school, did he know what he wanted to be? So I just want to share my experience. I was a very serious student, very self-motivated, put a lot of pressure on myself to do well. When I was in high school, I knew I wanted the business of fashion.
Especially the
went to
red
be
carpet.
Boston University School of Management. I transferred because I didn't really have the social life I wanted, even though I was such a serious student. So I transferred, and then I went to Fashion Institute of Technology with buying and merchandising and marketing. I straddled both sides of the fence, wholesale and retail. I was a garmento, mostly women's apparel and accessories. I really loved when I was buyer at Bonwit Teller.
You know,
I would never have expected, Robert, that, I couldn't have predicted in 1992 when we first started working together and I was marketing you and your business because right in between over and next, my over was when I was in the world of fashion, and then I embraced an entrepreneurial opportunity with my good friend Marcy Cohen, who started her own publication called Material Information. It was a B2B, beautiful publication, cover to cover, and she's an amazing writer. She worked at HFD in the world of fashion and fabric and home fashion. It was such a great partnership because we also balanced each other. That was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, and I really didn't know where it was going to go this past 32 years. And it has been the most joyous ride because ever since I came home from my honeymoon and it was over, I started working with Robert. And if you go back to episodes 1 and 2, you'll learn more about our journey individually and collectively, personally and professionally. Being a podcast producer, being a marketer, being a content creator, being event producers, online, in person, and getting to meet the most wonderful people along the way. So this has really been the coolest experience ever. And I don't know what the next 10, 20, 30 years brings, but bring it on. Because
we're ready.
Because it's exciting. And I love writing, right, Robert? I mean, please check out
You're
our
a
blog
writer.
articles because I love writing with meaning and thought and knowledge that really matters for us all to think differently and to grow. So we really thank David. We're so happy to have learned his story.
Thank you to David for being a part of this podcast, and thank you to all of you for listening. Thanks for tuning in to Between Over and Next. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it meaningful and insightful.
If you value it to be worthwhile, please share it with your friends and family.
We would really appreciate it if you could take a moment to write a review for us. Your feedback will help us continue to create content that resonates with you.
And don't forget, in the show notes, you can find all the relevant links mentioned in this episode, from accessing free downloads to visiting our website and more.
If you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Simply send us an email. Our email address is hello@hollyandrobert.com. We're always excited to connect with our listeners.
So until next time, thank you again for joining us on Between Over and Next.
Thank you for listening to Between Over and Next, the podcast that navigates the twists and turns of life with courage, laughter, and a whole lot of inspiration. Tune in every Tuesday to hang out with Holli and Robert on your favorite podcast platform. Visit hollyandrobert.com and follow them on social media to ignite your passion and fuel your dreams.